Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile, the podcast. This is episode 211 called Pam. This podcast is sponsored by Receptiva DX. Receptiva DX is a powerful test that has helped thousands of women who have experienced recurrent pregnancy loss or IVF failure. The test helps detect inflammatory conditions of the uterus that might be preventing you from becoming pregnant or staying pregnant. The most common underlying condition of a positive Receptiva DX test is endometriosis with or without symptoms. If you or someone you know has struggled with IVF, Receptiva DX may give you the answer and treatment protocols that you're looking for. Talk with your doctor about Receptiva DX because the journey is so worth it. Plus, guys, Infertile AF listeners are getting $75 off the Receptiva DX test. So all you have to do is go to receptivadx.com or download the app Receptiva DX, use code INFERTILEAF23, and you'll get $75 off. Thanks, Receptiva DX. All right, guys, before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody that Fertility Rally memberships are open. We are open the first week of every month. So if you are looking for a safe space, somewhere to come, somewhere to be with people who get it, no matter what you're going through, please join our family. We have more than 500 members globally right now. We've got 3 private Facebook groups. We have 4 support groups per week. You're welcome to come to any of them. And it is just the thing I wish I had when I was going through it. So we have monthly membership options. We have annual membership options. We also have Rally Guys, which just started last month. So we have a monthly group for guys too who are going through this. So if you are going through this and you don't want to be alone, you don't want to feel alone, you are not alone. We are all here for you no matter what. So please spread the word or join us yourself. We're on Instagram where you can find more info at Fertility Rally, or you can look at our website, which is fertilityrally.com. All right. So I so enjoyed talking to my guest today. She is just brilliant and cool, and we had a great conversation. I learned a lot about fertility pharmacies and just her own story as well. So my guest is Pam Schumann, and she is the CEO of SMP Pharmacy, which is a groundbreaking fertility and specialty pharmacy that's dedicated to empowering patients and clinics throughout the fertility journeys. So she's going to talk about all the things that SMP is doing to revolutionize and really change and make it easier for all of you who are going through this, and also for the nurses as well. So they kind of tapped into something that nobody has before, and it's really, really cool. And Pam is also going to talk about her own fertility journey. So I don't want to get too much into it, give too much away, but I will say that a lot of interesting things came from what she went through. And again, she's just one of those people that, took her pain and turned it into her power. And she's doing amazing things with SMP and with everybody in this community as well. So also really, really exciting is that Infertile AF listeners are getting a very special discount from SMP Pharmacy of $200 off. So if you go to smpharmacy.com and you use the code Fertility Rally, you'll get $200 off. So definitely check it out. They're also working with Little Words Project, and everybody that places an order gets a really, really cute bracelet. So I love what they're doing. I'm really believe in it strongly, and I had a great time talking to her. So without further ado, this is Pam's infertility story. Hey, Pam, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited to talk about all the cool things that you're doing in the fertility space. But let's start where I always like to start is, did you always want to build a family and have kids?
I did. I don't know how much I thought about it before I met my husband, but as soon as we were together and knew that we were getting married, it was really clear that together we wanted to build a family.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any indications like growing up that there might be some sort of issues, or like, what did you think about, having kids? We talk a lot. I know you said you've listened to some of these episodes. So we talk a lot about how people growing up, it's like, don't get pregnant. It's so easy to get pregnant, all that stuff. Hopefully that narrative is changing now that people are being more open about fertility in general and infertility. But what did you know growing up?
I knew very little growing up. I didn't think a lot about my fertility. To your point, I probably spent more time trying not to get pregnant than thinking about what it would take to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up joining the fertility community from a professional perspective shortly before I got married and was trying to conceive myself. So I actually had quite a lot of information by the time my husband and I were trying to conceive. And I think that allowed me to move forward to seek, to seek help of a fertility specialist sooner than I might have otherwise, just because I was sort of in the midst of the fertility world by the time I was undergoing my own journey.
Okay, so tell us what you were doing professionally.
So I, at that time, was working for one of the practice management companies that managed fertility centers around the country. And I came in to start up the consumer services division. So take a step back. I've always been in healthcare, and I've been in consumer-driven women's health for almost 20 years now, or just over 20 years now, I should say.
Okay.
And basically, my job was to help work with these practices to create a better patient experience, whether it was, I'm really dating myself here because you have very geo-targeted social media now. That was not the case 20 years ago.
Totally.
It was fairly new. Any marketing you did or brand awareness was national. And so as a national brand of fertility centers, we were able to begin the conversation with patients, help them understand when they should seek care, and potentially direct them to one of the practices that we managed. And then we also created some patient financial programs that made paying for treatment a little bit more manageable if you were a cash pay patient. And so I worked on those types of programs from the orientation of the patient experience. And then I became a patient myself.
Right. Okay. So tell me about that. When you guys started to try, were there issues right off the bat, or was it just not happening, or what was going on?
Yeah, I was probably 33, 34 when we started to try to conceive. We were not having any luck. I had been off the birth control pill. We went in and had a whole number of tests done on both myself and my husband. And what we discovered was that I had a low ovarian reserve. So right now, most people do an AMH to measure their ovarian reserve. At the time, we were doing what was called an FSH, which really had to be timed on day 2 or day 3 of your cycle. And it's basically an indication of how hard your body's already working to create one egg. And so it tends to be an indication of your reproductive potential. And while I was in my mid 30s, my reproductive potential was in its late 30s, probably early 40s on average. So it was pretty clear that I was going to need help. And the physician that I saw, was, I thought, really, really direct in helping me in providing what I would call decision support, right?
Oh.
He laid out what my options were and kind of the pros and cons of each path. So you can do the IUI route. We haven't tried it. It may work. It's going to be less expensive, but it could consume, a year of your life, and you'll be 1 year less fertile when we move on to IVF. And sort of asked me what was most critical to me at this time. Was it speed to conception? Was it cost? Was it biology? I guess he was trying to discern whether donor egg was going to be an option if that's where we got. And my husband and I did go through a couple of IUIs, but I think it became evident pretty quickly with how high my FSH was that we really needed to move on to IVF if we wanted a good chance of conceiving.
I love that term, decision support, because I feel like sometimes when you come into this world, you're so overwhelmed and they just kind of throw things at you. And, some REs explain it better than others, or whoever you deal with in the clinic. But I feel like for me, it was just like, here's what you're going to do. And here's I didn't have much decision support. And as people know, if they know my story, like I did get lucky and IVF worked for me. And I have my son now who's almost 7, but I didn't know about advocating. I didn't know about asking questions. I mean,
Yep.
just, it was just kind of like, here's what you do. And I was like, okay. And I did it. You know what I mean? So I'm glad that you had a different experience. It sounds like they were very practical about, each road that you could go down and the kind of pitfalls of each decision. So that's cool.
Yeah, I think it is an individual decision about where, what your priorities are. And some people are concerned about the invasiveness of IVF and potentially want to try something that feels less invasive to them. Sometimes it's a cost issue. Sometimes it's, we're not in a big hurry here. We want to go through the journey as it is. And I think there's a balance between providing enough information. And the reason I say decision support is it's not just like, well, do you want to do IUI or IVF? It's these are the pros and cons of IUI, and these are the pros and cons of IVF, because otherwise, what are you making that decision on? And sometimes people just go, well, I don't really understand the difference, so I guess I'll do the cheaper one.
Totally.
And so I think, I do think some of the data analytics and AI and predictive modeling and some of those things are giving people now even more information. It's still not an exact science, as anyone who's gone through it
Yeah, far from it.
painfully aware.
We like to call it a crapshoot in many cases.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
it's, and that's very draining. And so I think anything that gives people control of their decision making is really useful.
Definitely.
So we had our first IVF cycle canceled for poor response, which I remember not being able to get off the couch for like 2 days when I heard. It's like, wow, like we didn't even make it to retrieval. Like they didn't even think it was worth putting us under anesthesia and taking whatever eggs they could get. And it kind of felt like the world was ending right then. And it happened to be right around 9/11, by the way. So it did feel like the world was ending literally around me at some times. But, we regrouped with our physician. They were very encouraging that they felt they could change our medication cocktail, and they understood where we were. And they encouraged us to try again, which we did. We had 6 eggs. 2 of them made it to embryos. So really bad quantity, but lucky for us, really good quality of our embryos. There wasn't a lot of genetic testing back then, and they didn't recommend it for us anyway, given how few embryos we had. We put both back, and I got pregnant with my son, who is now 20. And so we were very, very fortunate that it worked for us under all those circumstances.
Yes. How did you do with all the meds and all that stuff leading up to the retrieval? Did it take a toll on your body, or was it okay? Or like, what was the experience like for you?
Yeah, it definitely is overwhelming to get those medications, the refrigeration, the needles and syringes. Again, I think they've come kind of a long way in the last 10, 15 years in terms of the medications largely being in pens or in pre-filled syringes. So we were breaking glass ampules and mixing powder.
Right.
We got through it. I think it was harder on my marriage than on my body, to be honest.
Ooh, can we delve into that a little bit? I'd love to hear more about that. I always talk about how it was really, really hard on mine as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we take a step back, it can really sort of zap romance, right? You think we're going to try to create a family together, and it's very sort of loving and romantic until, a doctor and a set of lab people and a phlebotomist get involved.
Exactly. So, yeah, romance is definitely not part of the equation. I mean, that's like the furthest thing.
Even leading up to that, right, where you're all of a sudden like, now this goes from being something enjoyable and exciting that we're going to do together. It can sort of become a chore where you're like
100%.
looking at your temperature and the clock, and then it becomes super stressful because what you're trying to build starts to feel a little bit out of reach. My husband's incredibly supportive and was there the whole time, but getting him up at 5 o'clock in the morning to help with the injections. So I could drive, in my case, I had to drive about an hour and 15 minutes for monitoring each morning, go to monitoring, and then get to my office because nobody, despite the fact that I worked in the fertility space, nobody at work knew I was going through this.
Did you choose to keep that a secret?
Yeah, I did not, not from friends and family, but it was not something I wanted to discuss at work. I hadn't been there a very long time at that time. And I kind of had that feeling. I got advice from a physician who said, whoever you want to tell about your journey, you probably have to be prepared to tell them the good and the bad along it, right? So if you're telling somebody you're going to go do a retrieval and have a transfer, you're likely going to have to tell them the outcome of that. If you tell them you have an early pregnancy success, you probably have to share with them if the pregnancy doesn't go to term. So it's I didn't feel like that was something I wanted to share with my coworkers. I hadn't been there a super long time, and it felt very personal.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So another question I have for you is, so now that your son is 20, when did you tell him about his conception story? Did you guys talk about that with him when he was younger? And like, I'm curious, not that you have to speak on his behalf by any means, but like how that, how he feels about that now. Is it even a thing? I mean, I feel like with my son, he'll be like, okay, cool. Who can, like it's so common now. I don't think it will be that big of a deal,
Yeah, I do not recommend that others do. I did, but I worked in the fertility field. I have the whole time. So we talked a lot about what mom does. I'm not a physician. I'm involved in this. I work with patients going through infertility treatment, lots of sperm pens and t-shirts around the house from the conferences. And we were in the car. He was in the front seat with me. He was in his early teens, 13 or 14. And he asked me a question about IVF. And I said, well, when you were conceived, we only had the 2 embryos, and we were fortunate that one was you. And he looked at me and he said, I didn't know I was an IVF baby. So I don't think it occurred to me that I had never told him that before.
Right. That makes sense.
We actually have a picture of the 2 embryos that are framed in our office. So
right. Okay.
Either I mentioned it in passing and just assumed he knew it, or I just thought he knew it. And so, yes, yeah. I did not get Mother of the Year that year, but he was very cool with it. And I think because we talked so much about it otherwise, just IVF in general and how natural and normal it was, I don't think it freaked him out. And yeah, he's, we've talked about it since, but he hasn't expressed any concerns about it.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
It's funny. I was talking to my son about it, and I mentioned something about IVF, and he's like, what's IVF? He's like, I know what the NBA is, and I know the NFL. And I think he was just thinking anything that's like some sort of acronym or like a group of letters, like is sports related. And I was like, yeah. So we talked about it a little bit, but it's just, it's interesting to me, when people end up telling kids or not, or how they tell them. There's so many great books and stuff now too out there.
Yeah, we did not have that. And then we also have a second child, our daughter, who is not from IVF, seemingly miraculously, given what I've already told you about my fertility potential. We ended up getting pregnant on our own when my son was like 10 months old. So it was a surprise on many, many levels. And
how did that feel?
Surreal. I mean, I really just did not think I could get pregnant on my own. And we had actually been in the hospital with my son. He ended up having asthma and a little piece of his lung collapsed. We didn't know it. We were in the hospital. I spent the night. I was laying there in my mind, calculating that I had stopped breastfeeding a couple months prior to that. I was like, I probably should have be getting my period soon. I haven't. So on my way home, while I was picking up my son's nebulizer, I grabbed a pregnancy test. And in all the pregnancy tests I ever took in my life, this was the only one that ever came back positive.
Oh my God. That's so interesting.
And I told my husband, and I don't think we talked about it for 2 weeks because we were caring for my son who was recovering. And yeah. And then I think there was a little fear after that because
Sure.
I was then concerned, would this be a viable pregnancy given what I know about my ovarian reserve and my chances of conceiving? And, so you almost get that fear of, at that point I was I was 36 by the time that happened. And, I had concerns about
Yeah,
whether I was going to get to enjoy that.
absolutely. So did those concerns continue throughout the pregnancy, or was there a point where you were able to exhale and kind of relax?
No, I was able to relax. We went through some genetic testing, and so we were cleared that there were no genetic issues. And my doctor basically said, you had excellent quality embryos last time around. It was really a quantity problem for you. So, it we probably didn't have any higher chance of having complications than anybody else.
Wow. Okay. Did they ever explain to you, like from a medical standpoint, or do you have a theory on like why you didn't need assisted reproductive technology for the second child?
No, and I think it's a numbers game from my sense, right? I
Yeah.
never had no chance of conceiving on my own. I didn't have
Yeah.
blocked tubes. I didn't have, there was nothing preventing the sperm and the egg from meeting up. So, I think my chance was not nothing, but it was
Right.
probably 10%, right? And I
Gotcha.
could go years. So I just think it was luck of the draw that in this particular instance, everything came together. It was very interesting though, because a lot of people said, oh, you just needed to relax and not think about it. And the
Right.
first baby kind of opened everything up. And I'm like, I'm not really sure that's how it works.
No,
But,
right. Yeah.
you know, there's odds very, unless you're menopausal, your chance is not zero, is never
Right.
zero.
Right.
And it just happened to work this time. So I
Yeah.
took it as the miracle that it was.
So interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Let's talk about SMP Pharmacy Solutions, which is
Yeah.
what you're doing now. How did you, first of all, tell us what it is, please. And then how did you transition from what you were talking about before career-wise to where you are now?
Yeah, it's an interesting little COVID story. So I have been, as I said, I was on the practice management side. I had my own company for a while. I sit on the board of Resolve, so very active in the patient experience. I'm just very passionate about this space. When I was with IntegraMed, one of the things we were starting to tackle was the medication component and really just looking at all of the ancillary services that surround an IVF cycle that have historically been very disjointed and siloed. So I don't know what your experience was like, but you often the patient is dealing with the practice. They might be dealing with their insurance company or a lending company if they're borrowing money. They're dealing with a genetics company at times. They're dealing with a pharmacy. They're probably dealing with somebody who's cryopreserving their materials. I mean, you're just dealing with all of these different providers and vendors to assemble one IVF cycle. And so part of what we were starting to focus on is how do we create a more integrated experience? We're not saying we're going to own the pharmacy channel, but how do we ensure that everybody's holding on to the same bit of information? And what we found is, the nurse sends a prescription in on behalf of the physician, has no idea what happens to that prescription, right? They don't know if the patient, if it gets transferred, if it gets filled, how much medication the patient took, actually purchased versus what they wrote. And then what I discovered in the process was that the pharmacy knows what was written, but doesn't really know the dosing that the patient is taking, which, as you know, can change in the middle of the cycle.
Right.
And so the patient's kind of in the middle trying to navigate in an area that's very new to them.
This week at Macy's, refresh your wardrobe for spring with great deals like the season's latest handbags and shoes, $34.50 to $129. Iconic Levi's jeans for him and her, $59.99 to $69.99. And active looks to move in style, 25 to 40% off. Plus, Star Rewards members earn on every purchase, except gift cards, services, and fees. At Macy's. More at Macys.com/Star Rewards. Savings off sale and clearance prices. Exclusions apply.
Save big on select Whirlpool and Maytag appliances at Lowe's. Right now, get deals on top items like the Whirlpool stainless steel kitchen suite and Maytag Pet Pro laundry pair that removes 5 times more pet hair. Plus, get free delivery when you spend $396 or more. Shop appliances for less in-store or online at Lowe's. Comparing normal cycle with Pet Pro filter and option to cycle using traditional agitator without Pet Pro filter and option. Results will vary based on fabric and type of pet hair. Exclusions apply. See Lowe's.com for details. Offer ends 3/8.
Pros know a thing or two about how to get the toughest messes clean. That's why they've long trusted cleaning products from Ecolab for their businesses. And now, that level of clean is available for your home at the Home Depot. Introducing Ecolab Scientific Clean, a full line of pro-grade cleaning products for all your home's needs, so you can clean like you mean business. Now available exclusively at the Home Depot. How doers get more done.
And so we were trying to say, look, if we can push to you, and we at that point was the practice side, if we can push the information to you, pharmacy, can you push back to us the status of the prescriptions that we send you? And maybe we can push back to you the dosage so that we can make sure the patient has the medications they need when they need it and not a lot of excess, and we can avoid, people running out of medications.
Mm-hmm.
I left IntegraMed before we ended up putting that into action. And I ended up joining the board of SMP because they were one of the pharmacies we were talking to based on their kind of excellent reputation within our network of practices. So I joined the board, started to map out these kind of future states. What could the pharmacy patient practice ecosystem look like? How do you leverage technology and as well as service components, and started to build out some cool tools. And then the opportunity came on to leave the board, move from the board to the CEO role. And I just thought we were doing some really interesting stuff. And so about 2 years ago, I joined as the CEO.
Okay. So what are some things that you've picked up along the way, especially having been, a fertility patient, about the patient experience that you saw needed to change and that you guys are implementing on your side?
So what I found was that the process had not changed very much since when I went through IVF. And at that point, it was 16, 17 years prior to that, because it was a few years ago when I first looked at this. And I thought, one, this is super inconvenient and time consuming for the patient and confusing and expensive. And it's also very time consuming for the nurse. And it does not make best use of a nurse's education to be tracking down medications. The other piece is, there's this considerable effort that goes into injection training. People have to be trained on how to use, mix, and inject and store the medications that they're getting so that they optimize their chance of success. That was also incredibly time consuming for patients and nurses. And really the cause of most after-hour calls to practices are related to how to properly self-inject medications.
Mm-hmm.
And so what COVID did was force the, kind of remote education and learning, and opened up, I think, a tremendous opportunity for a better experience. So historically, a nurse prescribes your medication. I mean, the physician prescribes it, but they generally handle the actual sending of the RX to the pharmacy. You then schedule injection training with a nurse to be shown what medications you're going to be using, how to administer them, et cetera, et cetera. But that usually happened in person and several weeks before your medications actually arrived.
Right.
So what happened? Your medications arrived and you forgot 99% of what you spent an hour learning 3 weeks prior.
100%. And can I add too that the stakes are so high with this medication because it's so expensive. And if you screw something up, you're like out money, it's stressful, all that stuff that I think that even if you remember, you're second guessing yourself. Like, all right, how do I do this? Do I mix this? Do I shake this? Is it this needle or is it that needle? There's so many factors.
So many things. And you want to be precise. Precision feels critical at this point. So when we saw an opportunity, one of the things I said was, if we could create personalized, on-demand, trackable injection training, we can save the nurses a ton of time. We can bring the education to the patient when they need it, where they need it, and accessible to watch again. And we can standardize it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I say standardize, I mean, if there's 43 nurses in a practice, which nurse happens to do your training, what kind of mood they're in, how much sleep they got, it can all impact it and your ability to digest it. And so we made a pretty ambitious leap because, let me back up a second. The alternative, because people weren't going in person for this injection training, is they were going onto YouTube and grabbing injection videos.
Right.
But then you're relying on and hoping that the person whose video you're watching is doing it correctly. Like,
right. I did that. I did that. I watched YouTube videos, some randoms. Yeah.
And, not all doctors do everything the same way. There's different dosing. Some people want you to use your thigh. Some want you to put it in your butt. Sometimes it's sub-Q. Sometimes it's IM. So the practices were concerned because it may not be consistent with what they're explaining. And so we created what's called MedReady. And MedReady is a series of injection videos. It's starting with what I would call contextual protocol. So this is the type of protocol you're on, the type of medication you're going to be taking, and how it's going to impact your body.
Right.
Then it's a series of individual medications, and then it's actual injection videos, so subcutaneous or IM.
Mm-hmm.
And what the practice can do is create their own library by tethering together these three videos from these three sections to match how they prescribe. So someone may say, we use a long luteal protocol. It has follistim, it has gonal, it has, this kind of trigger, that kind of trigger. They pull it together based on their protocols. And then they can individually assign these envelopes to patients. They can track whether the patients watched it or not. And then they can offer supportive one-on-one training if the patients need it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened is it's completely transformed injection training. It is our 5,000 patients per month being assigned MedReady, whether they use SMP or not. We've made it free, available to any patient.
That's so cool.
And the nurses the amount of time nurses spend on injection training has been reduced by 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
They get virtually no call on, no after hours call.
Mm-hmm.
And patients' feedback is we are better prepared. We feel better about the care we're getting, and we feel more in control of it. And so, that was an example of something that we thought was a meaty problem to solve. And it wasn't clear who was going to solve it because who was going to make the investment in this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made this available to any practice to assign to any patient, whether they use SMP as their pharmacy or not.
Mm-hmm. That's so great. Groundbreaking. Absolutely. And I think that something like that can only come from people that have been in it, that have been through it. So that's why there's so many brands and companies and communities and services coming from people that have gone through fertility journeys and infertility journeys. Don't you think?
Yeah, because how else you just don't know. You can't even. I'm sure this is true outside of fertility and in any other sort of, I did. You haven't been there yet. I did this when, my kids started looking at colleges. You're like, wow.
Can I call you when I go through all that? You seem so brilliant about decision making.
But I think so that's just one example on the softer side of things.
Right.
We completely transformed our packaging.
Yeah.
So when I got to SMP, the first thing I did was send me one of our packages. And I thought, good God, I needed an X-Acto knife. And, it was like Tetris. There was just, everything was packed in there perfectly from the pharmacy's perspective so that it stayed cold, so that, everything would fit in the smallest box, so that it was the least expensive, but it was not intuitive on how did everything go together. And I'm thinking of the consumer's perspective, assuming you don't have insurance, you've just spent $5,000 on medication. It should feel like something special has shown up and inspirational and not, as I say, like potholders from Etsy. So everything from, is it clear on the outside of the box that this has to be refrigerated and should be opened immediately? When they open the box, there's SMP tissue paper on top. There's our Hope bracelet that we did in combination with Little Words Project. We can come back to that if you want.
Love that. Yeah.
And then you lift it. There's one folder that says, we've got you. And inside of it is all the paperwork you need, your checklist of what's in the box, what needs to be refrigerated, all the things you need. Then your non-refrigerated items, then your refrigerated items. And from a patient experience, it's just much more intuitive. And from a business perspective, it makes more sense because we're not fielding a ton of calls saying, can you help me unpack my box? Right? Like we were getting a lot of time spent on that. So, one other thing, we opened all 3 of our pharmacies 7 days a week, right? Just because FedEx can't send a package on Sunday doesn't mean we're not there for the customer.
Right.
IVF is a 7-day-a-week thing.
Even during holidays and stuff, because I think that's one of the frustrations I know talking to Fertility Rally members is like when clinics close down for 2 weeks around the holidays and they're like, hello, like I'm still in the middle of my cycle.
Yeah, no, we are closed.
Questions. People just go dark.
Yeah, we are closed for 6 holidays. I think Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's, where we're literally closed.
Yeah.
And then we have limited hours of operations on the weekends, but sometimes we have to find a local alternative for somebody, or we need to coordinate with the nurse and you need to be there. I mean, that was our motto. My team was like, they're coming from a pharmacy orientation. They're saying, well, why? The pharmacy is about shipping out medications and we can't ship out. And I'm like, well, we can courier, which we do. And sometimes Sunday is when the patient wants to get all their information together. They don't want to call us Sunday morning. And it also created a much better, again, from a business perspective, it made sense because Mondays were wild, long hold times, tons of phone calls. We smoothed that out by being open Saturday and Sunday, and people could ask questions and pay for their order and request a refill on the weekends. And it just prevented that 20-minute hold time on Monday mornings when everybody's who didn't reach us Friday is trying to call us. So
absolutely.
It's things like that I think nobody should necessarily applaud. It's how it should be. It's right. And we are we're getting there first. And I hope while I want to remain competitively advantaged, I also hope that we are setting a new baseline.
Yeah, definitely. So here's another thing I want to ask you about, Pam. People, which I didn't realize, is you can choose which pharmacy you want to use, right? You don't have to go with the clinic or the pharmacy that your clinic necessarily works with. Is that correct in your opinion?
That's true.
Okay. So what if somebody, wants to be proactive about, switching pharmacies. How do you even go about that? Like, what are the basic steps? Because again, it probably seems really remedial to you, but someone who's listening, who's new to this world, like all this stuff is so overwhelming. So anything that's explained, I think makes it easier.
Yeah, I think it starts with a couple. First, I think knowing how to decide where you want to go is an important step. What are you looking for? I mean, price is obviously the first thing that most people look at. Are they competitively priced? But also, are they there when I need them to be, right? You might find the cheapest pharmacy, but if they're open 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, that can turn into a very expensive problem for you later. Everything from, do they speak the language in your native tongue? Are they open in multiple locations? Those kinds of things are one of the things you might look at when you're deciding what pharmacy to use. I do think the relationship with the practice does matter. Normally a practice will work with more than one pharmacy. They may have one or two preferred, but if they don't have any relationship with the practice, it's going to be hard to get exceptions and VIP service when something goes wrong. Because, for example, I have nurses that have my direct cell number, and they will send me a note saying, I got this patient, she broke her vial of XYZ, what can we do? And if it's a practice we do a lot of business with, I mean, we're going to try to help anybody, but if it's a practice we do a lot of business with, we have a relationship with, we can, we know generally where we can go locally to get them something. So I think, whether or not your practice has any relationship with them matters.
Interesting.
But if you decide to do it, I think you either just tell your nurse, I'd like to use this pharmacy, please send it there. Or if they've already sent it to another pharmacy, you let that pharmacy know, I'd like to have my prescription transferred, and they will take care of it for you.
Okay.
I mean, we transfer prescriptions all the time because of insurance. So someone can send us a prescription, we run a benefit verification, we go, oh, you got to go to Cigna because that's, Cigna mail order, because your insurance is going to cover the medications. Would you like us to transfer it for you? We take care of that. So it can happen. Or someone, SMP gets transfers all the time because they went to a new doctor, the doctor sent them somewhere else, and they said, no, I worked with SMP on my last cycle. Can you send it to them? So it should be fairly straightforward. If it's already gone to the pharmacy, ask the pharmacy to transfer it. If it hasn't already been sent, tell the nurse where you would like it to go.
Love that. Okay. Anything else that you want to share about what you guys are doing differently?
Yeah, I think I mentioned the Hope bracelet. This was a partnership with Little Words Project. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Of course, I love them. Yeah.
So their founder also has her own fertility journey. SMP has a head of marketing. I think we probably are the only fertility pharmacy that's actually invested in marketing. And it's mostly around, is all of our communication consistent and understandable? Is our brand relatable and modern? And, she really personifies what SMP is. And we always put a premium item in the box, and she developed this relationship with Little Words Project, and we co-created a Hope bracelet. For those who don't know, Little Words Project has bracelets with individual ID tags on them, and you can register your bracelet either anonymously or openly, tell your journey. And the idea is, when you no longer need the bracelet, you pass it on to somebody else. And it has this history that goes with it. And we created the fertility one. All of our IVF patients get one in the box. And I have to tell you, the buzz and feedback has been completely overwhelming. I think my marketing person was expecting it. I was not.
Right.
Our pharmacists, when a patient actually comes into one of our physical locations, because most patients receive their medications through the mail. But when they do come in, and our pharmacist hands them the package with the tissue paper sticking out, and will personally hand them the bracelet with a handwritten note.
Yeah.
They burst into tears.
Totally.
Because they recognize that you are a customer, but we see that you are a human, and we're here for you. We are hoping this is successful, and it's really moved a lot of people. And I think these type of things have differentiated us. When someone's trying to decide what pharmacy, these things make a difference.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that makes that such a standout is I love Little Words Project, and they're actually based right by where I live. I think people have felt like a number for so long in this journey in so many circumstances, whether it's going into your clinic and they don't remember who you are and they're giving you questions that they should know the answers to already, things like that. We hear it again and again in our community that, you just don't get this individualized service. So doing something like that, those little touches, that's why people burst into tears, because it's like, you see me. Oh my God. Thank you.
Exactly.
It does make such a difference.
Well, and I think what you're doing makes that same difference. People feel very alone, and they have so much emotion that it's you sometimes feel like, am I overreacting? Because it's hard, unless you happen to be in a community, find somebody else who is going through it at the same time. It can be very isolating.
100%. That's why we started Fertility Rally. It's like the place I wish I had, it's all the things I wish I had, because I was on an island and feeling so low and so alone. And, I've said a million times, my friends were around, but it wasn't friends that were in it, so they didn't really know.
And even if you've been through it, they've moved on. They may have moved on. And that's just the nature of things. I think that's so right. And I happen to have my best friend was going through fertility treatment at the same time. And I was in the professionally in the space. So I was sort of aware of it, but in some ways that was harder because I saw all the things that could go wrong and, all the stories, and it almost was too much information. And I just think creating that community is so important. So again, thank you for doing.
Of course. No, I'm so passionate about it. And it's like the best thing we've ever done. We had our big group last night where there's like 50 people on the call. And it's just every time I come off a group, I'm like, oh, so lucky to be doing this. It feels really good. Can you share some, I know your journey was a while ago, but you're still really immersed in this field, obviously. Can you share some words of advice or just like maybe something you wish you would have known before, you went through what you went through, for somebody who might be new to this world and just kind of struggling?
Yeah, I think I was really hard on myself about I felt like a failure. I was this sort of professional type A person. I was very accustomed to the notion that if I just worked hard enough and did the right things, I could do anything. And that can be really, really hard. That moment, well, once you have children, you see it if you're fortunate enough to have them, but not as much as in your control as you would like to think. So just be kind to yourself. Be honest with yourself about what you want and sort of manifest and think through it. I mean, obviously, everybody who's going through this wants to have a child, but I think understanding what your limits are, how far you can go in, whether or not you're open to alternative family building options or child-free or whatever. You don't have to think about that early on, but I think for us, we had a very broad definition of family. We knew early on that if IVF didn't work for us, we were open to donor egg, we were open to donor embryo, which really wasn't a thing, back then, or adoption if that was a possibility. And that's not how everybody feels about it, but we knew that. And that kind of kept us going for, we're going to try this, we're going to do IVF this many times, and then we're going to give it our all. And then we know that's not the end of the journey for us. And that's not the case for everybody. So I think trying to think about it, not totally as episodic, but that you're about to embark on a journey and there's going to be some twists and turns that are out of your control. And I wish I did a little bit more of that earlier on. It took a lot of pressure off when I was able to recognize that there was so much I could do. There was so much we could afford. And, again, we were lucky that on our second try it worked, but that was not obvious at the time.
right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to check out Fertility Rally if you'd like to join our family. You can find us on Instagram at Fertility Rally or our website, which is fertilityrally.com. Also, don't forget our very exclusive discount offer for you guys at smpharmacy.com. If you use the code Fertility Rally, you'll get $200 off, which is awesome. So I want to thank Pam again for everything she's doing and for sharing her story. And I will talk to you guys next time.
Save big on select Whirlpool and Maytag appliances at Lowe's. Right now, get deals on top items like the Whirlpool stainless steel kitchen suite and Maytag Pet Pro laundry pair that removes 5 times more pet hair. Plus, get free delivery when you spend $396 or more. Shop appliances for less in-store or online at Lowe's. Comparing normal cycle with Pet Pro filter and option to cycle using traditional agitator without Pet Pro filter and option. Results will vary based on fabric and type of pet hair. Exclusions apply. See Lowe's.com for details. Offer ends 3/8.
This week at Macy's, refresh your wardrobe for spring with great deals like the season's latest handbags and shoes, $34.50 to $129. Iconic Levi's jeans for him and her, $59.99 to $69.99. And active looks to move in style, 25 to 40% off. Plus, Star Rewards members earn on every purchase, except gift cards, services, and fees. At Macy's. More at macys.com/Star Rewards. Savings off sale and clearance prices, exclusions apply.